Welcome to the Gray Area Podcast. My name is Kevin Gray. Thanks for listening today. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Be sure to download and subscribe to the Gray Area Podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating, write a review for it. While you're there, you can download it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast for free. You can also check me out on your home of Dallas Mavericks basketball, 97.1 The Freak, as Mavericks pre- and post-game host for all Mavericks radio broadcast. Got a lot to get to on this episode of The Gray Area. The NBA All-Star Game is in the books, for better or for worse, and Micah Parsons won't stop talking, and I don't know if it really matters at this point. But first, the NBA All-Star Game, the 73rd version of it, is in the books after the Eastern Conference scored over 200 points and got the win over the Western Conference. Damian Lillard wins the All-Star Game MVP. He also had won the three-point contest for a second year in a row as well. LeBron James making history with his 20th consecutive start in the NBA All-Star Game. If you're looking for a little local flavor, Luka Doncic, 5-time NBA All-Star, 4th time as a starter, had 7 points, 7 rebounds, and 7 assists for number 77. And my favorite bit coming out of All-Star Weekend, number one, my man put on a suit. Number two, him making half-court shots and trick shots all throughout the weekend was a lot of fun to see. And his relationship with Nikola Jokic continues to be one of the more fun relationships really in all the sports. And I'm sure for Mavericks fans, they would love to see Nikola Jokic in a Maverick uniform and not vice versa, and Luka playing with the Denver Nuggets at some point. But whatever, that's another conversation for another day. But the conversation coming out of the All-Star Game is, hey, man, what's up with the competitiveness of this game, or the lack thereof now when it comes to NBA All-Star games? Because the Eastern Conference scored over 211 points, and you could tell NBA Commissioner Adam Silver was so upset at the effort of the game when he handed the trophy over to Giannis Antetokounmpo. He said, well, congratulations, you guys scored the most points, as he handed that monstrosity over to Giannis as the Eastern Conference celebrated their win over the West. And look, the NBA All-Star Weekend, this version of it wasn't necessarily its best moment, not going to lie to you. Not because of just the game itself, but the way that things were discussed and talked about when it came to certain events, when it came to the dunk contest, which was, again, dead on arrival because it didn't live up to any of the kind of hype that you would want it to live up to. Not just the judges, but the contest in and of itself, with Mac McClung winning for a second year in a row. The best event I thought of the weekend was Stephen Curry versus Sabrina Ionescu in the three-point shooting challenge that they had, where Sabrina, if she had been in the men's competition, would have faced off against Damian Lillard because she scored 26 points, the same amount of points that he scored to win the doggone championship. And of course, Stephen Curry, he was able to win, scoring 29 points over Sabrina's 26. And the commentary from one Kenny Smith left a lot to be desired. I'll get to that in a little bit. But back to the game itself. No competitiveness. The guys, you could tell, were getting up and down the floor. A barrage of three-pointers made and taken in the game in and of itself. But the commentary coming out of the game is, how in the world do you create something competitive or something symbolizing competitiveness in an exhibition game? Because never forget, the All-Star Game, for all the pageantry and glory that surrounds the weekend in and of itself, is an exhibition game. You heard Anthony Edwards, one of the stars from the Minnesota Timberwolves, talk about that as the game was over with, saying, look, it's an all-star game. There's not going to be a lot of competitiveness out there. Even Jalen Brunson, when the Eastern Conference was up at halftime, where they had scored over 100 points in the first half, said, hey, the goal was to get to 200 by the time the game was over with. And we did, and it was pretty doggone cool. And I'm like, okay, that's really cool in and of itself. But I guess when there's no defense being played, or there's a lack of effort being put forth on both ends of the floor, yeah, you're going to get to 200 points. Even Luka talked about it after the game himself, saying, hey, guys aren't going to play hard on defense, so why in essence should I play hard on offense? That isn't the kind of commentary that you want coming from the biggest stars of the game when it comes to its biggest showcase outside of the NBA Finals during the course of an NBA year. And yet here we are, folks complaining about a lack of fire and drive in the game, guys shooting and scoring at will whenever they want to, and a general just lackluster performance when it comes to the overall representation of what the game should be. Now, I'm a guy who's going to be 38 years old by the time we get to the end of 2024. So I remember the days of watching Michael Jordan and Kevin Garnett, Charles Barkley, among all the legends of the game that really gave a damn about the All-Star game and the competitiveness and the pride that comes with representing your conference as either an Eastern or Western Conference All-Star. Now, obviously, these guys weren't making the money 30 years ago that they're making now, and the incentive to necessarily play in this game may not be there. I mean, think about it. All these guys, especially the biggest stars of the game, the obligations that come with participating in an NBA All-Star weekend where most players who aren't All-Stars get a week off. And you would think for guys, especially the Luka Doncic's of the world, the Nikola Jokic's, any of the biggest stars that you want to name in the game, they just want to have a break too, but they can't because the obligation of being an NBA All-Star. And I'm not saying that the guys should be absolved from their responsibilities, and nor should they be complaining about them either. But at the same time, you have to think about all the things that come with being an NBA All-Star. And by the time they get to the game itself, they're just sick of it and ready to get home, just like you and I are, watching them put forward no kind of effort in the game itself. And for me personally, it sucks because I love the NBA All-Star weekend. Outside of the MLB All-Star game, I think the NBA All-Star weekend is the best of the four major sports. At its peak, you would have fantastic dunk contests, riveting three-point contests, and obviously the icing on the cake, being able to watch the greatest players in the world put on their skills night in that particular night and be able to put on a show with all the celebrities in the building watching the game. And you simply don't have that anymore. So I don't know. What do? Do you incentivize the game by putting money on the line for the winning team? You saw that they were already playing for charities of their choice for the Eastern and Western Conference. Do you find a way, I don't know, maybe shorten the game in and of itself? I don't know what you do, but here are some of the things that you can't do. Number one, you cannot assign home court advantage of the NBA Finals to the winner of the All-Star game. Major League Baseball tried to do that, and you saw how that worked out. Initially, it brought a measure of fire and competitiveness to the game in and of itself, but ultimately it was done away with because, again, it's an exhibition game. Nothing of consequence when it comes to the regular season or the playoffs should be decided in an exhibition game, which is what the All-Star game, any All-Star game, is. So maybe you don't do that. I've seen ideas of the USA versus the world, which does bring some kind of intrigue to have the kind of bragging rights, whether you're on Team USA or on Team World, to try and win and showcase who is better when it comes to Team USA or the world, especially with the amount of international guys that are the biggest stars of the game when it comes to Giannis, Luka, Nikola Jokic, take your pick, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander from Canada as well. But I don't know if that would create the kind of pride and incentive that you're looking for. Now, we've seen the in-season tournament from the NBA. You saw the money that was on the line and how guys were prideful, and not only just to win the in-season tournament itself, it created them kind of exciting brand of basketball in the middle of the season, but there was a hell of a lot of money on the line as well for the winners. And maybe that's something that you have to do to try to create some kind of measure of fire and pride to play in the game. But honestly, in my humble opinion, it shouldn't even come to that. It should be about your willingness to show off for your conference, put on a show for the fans, but yes, come out of the game uninjured. And LeBron James even talked about that after the game, said, look, the biggest win here is that nobody got hurt. And then you start thinking about all the other things about why this game may not matter nearly as much as it did. Think about just this year alone. For example, Tyrese Halliburton, who's been dealing with a hamstring injury, went on JJ Redick's podcast recently and talked about how he came back a little bit earlier so that he could try to meet the 65-game requirement in order to be eligible for all NBA teams and some of the postseason awards that affect the kind of money that he gets as far as his contract is concerned. You don't think these players were thinking about some of that when they play in the All-Star game? There is nothing worse that can happen in an exhibition game than one of these players getting hurt in a game that simply doesn't matter. Even Tyrese and LeBron talking about needing to take it easy because they've got an ankle injury in LeBron James that he has to continue to monitor, and Tyrese Halliburton, as I mentioned, dealing with the hamstring injury. So they weren't going to go nearly as hard as what you wanted them to. And give credit to Tyrese Halliburton, who came out smoking, hitting 5 of his first 6 3-pointers and was putting on a show for the hometown Indiana crowd. But at the same time, he couldn't go as hard as he wanted to even try to be able to be the eventual MVP. Now, he did get close to winning it, getting some of the votes as far as the NBA panel was concerned, the panel of writers that vote on the NBA All-Star game, ultimately it going to Damian Lillard. But the point remains the same. Guys aren't going to put forward the same kind of effort because, number one, the incentive is not there to do so. The money is on the line that could be in jeopardy if they get hurt. That does cost them opportunities to continue to play in the regular season games. That affects the money that they get by not being able to qualify for a postseason award if they are hurt. And then you have the game on top of it with everything else that goes on. There's nothing for players to feel like they need to do to put forward extra effort to play. One of the things I would love to see the NBA All-Star game get back to is, number one, wearing their own jerseys when it comes to the East and the West, whomever is the home team, this case, it being the Eastern Conference, because the game was in Indianapolis. They get to wear their home white jerseys while the Western Conference would have worn their road jerseys. I would love to see that. But I don't know what you do with this game. And I don't think the solution is getting rid of the All-Star game altogether. There's too much money on the line, too many sponsorships. There's too much money that's made throughout the course of a weekend in an NBA All-Star game to get rid of it altogether. But something has to be done to try to find a happy balance between competitiveness and drive on the floor while also putting on a show for fans while ensuring players don't necessarily get hurt. Because the effort from some of these players was atrocious, even from my guy Luka Doncic at times. And that's part of the other reason why this conversation is so interesting. Because when you have your biggest stars in the game playing in its showcase event for over 200 countries to watch and listen to around the world, and you've got those stars not putting forward really any kind of effort at all, it's a bad look for the game. It's a bad look for the league. And even Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic talked about that. Jokic going as far as saying, yeah, Luka's even worse than me when it comes to the effort in this game. He's 100% worse than me when it comes to this. To which I say, okay, try a little bit harder to at least give us the idea that you give somewhat a care about the game. Because here's the biggest part about all of this. If the NBA players don't care about this game, why should I give a damn about the game? Again, I love sports, so I'm always going to watch this game just because of the sheer athleticism and being able to see all the collection of stars in one building together. But I played sports growing up myself, and if once I decided I didn't feel like playing anymore, I didn't play. By the time I got to the age of 18 years old, I had played baseball really every year since I was the age of 6. By the time I got to my senior year of high school, and after that I completed that senior year of high school, I was tired of playing the game. And I didn't give forward the kind of effort that I wanted to know that I wanted to continue to play. It feels like we've gotten to a point where we drag this All-Star game on year after year after year, and the amount of incentive to play in the game has decreased more and more every single year because players look around as is a free vacation for them, at least for some of them. But at the same time, by the time they get to the game itself, who wants to put forward the kind of effort that requires that kind of show? While, yes, you want to be able to give fans something that they paid their hard-earned money for to watch, they still got a regular season to play. And that's the balance that these players have to find, is that not only do you play in this game hard, but how do you find yourself preparing to get ready for the rest of the season to assure that you're playing and being available for the most important part of the regular season, which is obviously the rest of the end of the season and into the playoffs. I don't know how you do that. But this was not a great look for the NBA in terms of its game in and of itself. And going forward here, somebody has to set a tone. I'll never forget the story of Kobe Bryant throwing a shoulder into Pau Gasol to set the tone between USA and Spain in the Olympics. We say Kevin, gold medals were on the line. Then pride and country was on the line in that particular scenario, and always is in the Olympics. Maybe somebody needs to set that kind of a tone in an NBA All-Star game. A little elbow, a little push, a little shove, something to announce that we're actually here to play in a game, because here's what it does and doesn't do when you don't show the kind of competitiveness and fire for an All-Star game. We remember watching you throughout the course of a regular season, and we want to see why you were an all-star to begin with. And when that isn't on display, we question why we should care at all. This is the greatest pickup game in the world, the NBA All-Star game, to quote Kobe Bryant, the late Kobe Bryant. Guys should be wanting able to put on a show in the greatest pickup game that there is, that the world of basketball has to offer. That simply is not the case anymore. Nobody really cares. Incentive to do so, not there. So much money on the line isn't there either in terms of guys being incentivized to play in the game, and they've got to protect their own brands. And look, there's going to be moments where you're going to be embarrassed, okay? Luka Doncic tried to throw up a one-handed dunk to himself off the backboard, and he got punched at the rim by the rim itself. It happens. You might turn into a meme. So what? Who cares? And maybe that's some of it. The fear of going out there and not only just hurting yourself, but embarrassing yourself in a game that doesn't mean all that much. Too much pride and ego to get out there and put your body on the line or put some kind of effort on the line in the game. I don't know. But something has got to change, and something's got to be a little bit different when it comes to how the NBA All-Star game gets down for itself, because this, my friends, this ain't it. And the way that folks are feeling about the All-Star game, I don't know how that changes. But based on what I saw, something's got to change, damn it, because that wasn't it, and I'm not trying to watch that going into next year. But as I said earlier, I probably will be, because I'm a sucker for sports, for athleticism, for the gifted athletes that get out there and play night in and night out. And I want to see them put on a show and show me why they're all-stars to begin with. Speaking of putting on a show, that's exactly what Sabrina and Stephen Curry did in that three-point shooting contest, where Stephen Curry beat Sabrina Ionescu 29-26, and what I thought was one of my favorite all-star events really in quite some time. That really kind of took the cake, especially when you saw, again, the lack of effort at times in the skills challenge, the lackluster dunk contest in which Mac McClung, a dude who literally isn't in the NBA, wins the dunk contest for the second year in a row. And yeah, Damian Lillard for the second year in a row himself winning the three-point contest. But what I found to be disappointing during the NBA All-Star Weekend this year, and I hate to be this guy because I love to cover the NBA. As I said a little bit earlier, I'm a Mavericks pre- and post-game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network, so I intimately cover this league and talk about the Mavericks specifically, obviously, but the league as a whole. And I love watching the game because the athletes of today's NBA are simply incredible. The offensive skill level that's in today's game is off the charts, but yet the commentary and the gatekeeping of those who are at the prominent top of the game, who you watch and listen to when it comes to how you feel about the game and the pulse of the game that's being described by these individuals, was really disappointing this weekend, particularly Kenny Smith. Kenny Smith, who said, hey, maybe Sabrina should have been shooting, from the women's line instead of shooting from the three-point line of the men, where she literally scored 26 points. It would have been in the men's competition final had she been in the contest in and of itself. But this is a larger discussion about the gatekeeping and the commentary that those who are most prominent in the league decide to give us on a nightly basis. And I thought this weekend was not their best showcase. The weekend of the NBA All-Star game itself wasn't necessarily the best. Again, give credit to a guy like Jaylen Brown, who is an all-NBA player who decided to put himself out there on Front Street and be a part of the dunk contest. Unfortunately, it didn't go very well for him, especially when he tried to do that D Brown look-away dunk that was made famous by D Brown, who used to play for the Celtics. Yeah, it didn't go over well. And even the judging for the contest itself wasn't great. Matt McClung tossing the ball to himself and being able to complete what was a really cool dunk didn't get the kind of love that it probably should have gotten. All this to say is the NBA All-Star Weekend has a problem, but yet the way the game is presented, especially in a celebration of what should be the biggest stars of the game on its grandest stage, that's got to change as well. On the alternate cast that TNT and Turner Sports had, it was Taylor Rooks, Draymond Green, and Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley at one point offering commentary about how Kevin Durant isn't leader, and he's shown that at all three of his stops. And I'm just listening and watching, thinking, who cares about that kind of commentary right now? Now, yes, there were some funny moments between Draymond and Charles that obviously allowed some levity for the broadcast, but I didn't need necessarily any kind of deep analysis or criticism of the game in this particular point where you say, Kevin, this is a part of the All-Star Weekend where you hear from NBA Commissioner Adam Silver, and he gives the state of the league and is be able to talk about what the league is going, some of the things that are going on in the NBA. And I get that. But at the same time, I don't need to hear about the negativity in the way that the game is presented through the eyes of individuals who haven't played the game in a long time. And that gets me to criticism of sometimes what I see when it comes to commentary from Shaquille O'Neal, Kenny Smith, Charles Barkley themselves is celebrate the game for what it is. There's a reason why the offensive skill is what it is. And yes, the rules have changed significantly. The amount of contact that's allowed in today's NBA isn't nearly what it was when you had hand checking and the amount of physicality from yesteryear's game, even 25, 30 years ago. The game has changed. It has evolved. And yes, well, there needs to be a little bit more of a correction when it comes to the amount of defense that's allowed in terms of the physicality of the game. That's something that can be explored throughout the course of the next few years to help improve the game so that you can see a level of balance, competitive balance, when it comes to night in and night out games. But at the same time, Kenny Smith was extremely disappointing in his commentary. In a game or in a weekend where we're to be celebrating something that's extremely unique with Sabrina Ionescu, who is one of the faces of the WNBA, taking on one of the generational faces of the NBA in Stephen Curry, there should be nothing but love and celebration for the show that the two of them put on. And the commentary that Kenny Smith provided was simply unacceptable. And it is disappointing that he didn't walk any of those comments back either, because the amount of backlash that he received was vast and swift. What's ironic is he acknowledged the amount of guff that he was getting online for the way that he got after the NBA judges for the dunk contest, but didn't acknowledge at one single point the idea that his commentary that he had for Sabrina Ionescu and somehow was harmful, which it was. Look, the game in the NBA All-Star game, whether you're looking at Sabrina, Stephen Curry, and the way that they went about the three-point shooting contest, that was one of the hallmark events of the weekend. It should have been celebrated as much. And yet, and still, the gatekeepers who are at the top of their commentary of the NBA game took away from what was a spectacular moment, not just in the NBA, but in all the sports. It obviously harkens back to Billie Jean King and the competition that she had. Obviously, you had something similar in this particular case. While, yes, the amount of seriousness not necessarily on the line, you heard Sabrina's comments after the event was over with. Look, if you can shoot, you can shoot. And that's the ultimate message here. And I thought the both of them, in terms of Steph and Sabrina, pulled it off quite nicely. But shame on Kenny Smith, man. Was not a fan of his this weekend. Not really a fan of the commentary that was taking place throughout the weekend. Him and Reggie Miller, especially during the skills and the dunk competition in and of itself. To which, okay, let's talk about the dunk contest. Oh, boy. I don't know what to do about that either. The theme of this podcast, if you haven't heard, is I don't know about a lot of these answers here, because you and I don't have a lot of answers to how to fix some of this stuff when it comes to the dunk contest and the NBA game, All-Star game in and of itself. But here's one solution that I do have that I think could create some incentive for these guys to come out and do the dunk contest, because here's two thoughts that I have. Number one, you don't necessarily need stars to be in the dunk contest. Think about it. One of the best dunk contests that we've ever seen, arguably the best that we've ever seen, took place back in, 2016 between Zach LaVine and Aaron Gordon. And the two of them put on a dunk contest display for the ages. Neither one of them you would consider NBA superstars or really some of the biggest stars of the game. But what they did was put on a show with the kind of creativity that created oohs and ahs for that Toronto crowd that particular night. So you don't necessarily need stars. You need guys who are willing to be able to be creative to put on a kind of show that will get the crowd going. Because after that dunk contest was over, we weren't crying about the idea that there weren't stars in the game. We were simply marveling at Aaron Gordon and Zach LaVine putting on the kind of show worthy to be mentioned with the stars of Dominique Wilkins and Michael Jordan and some of the great dunk contest participants, Vince Carter, that we've ever seen through the annals of the dunk contest. So that's my initial thought. You don't necessarily need stars for the dunk contest. You need guys that are, number one, creative enough to make dunks on the first try, because no matter how you may feel about it, being able to make a dunk on the first try creates that much more buzz about what you want to see coming next from that particular dunk participant. Number two, if you are a believer that you want to have stars in the dunk contest, here's some incentive that you could possibly create. $1 million for the winner, $500,000 for the runner-up. The NBA matches the $1 million that they paid to the winner of the dunk contest with $1 million donation to that winner's charity of choice and a $500,000 donation to the runner-up's charity of choice. That, I think, would create the incentive for these dudes to get out here, because all of this, it's sounding like, especially whether it be the dunk contest or maybe even the NBA All-Star game in and of itself, dudes will be willing to play if they get paid. You saw how it worked out for the NBA in-season tournament and the amount of commentary from NBA players about, man, there's a lot of money on the line if I win this in-season tournament. And not just for the big guys that are, on the team making the most money, but think about that 13th, 14th, 15th man that was able to see a bunch of money because of winning the in-season tournament for the Los Angeles Lakers. You could create that kind of incentive to get some of the biggest stars in the game in the dunk contest. I'm talking about the faces of the league with Zion Williamson, Ja Morant, just to name a couple, maybe Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Anthony Edwards, some of these guys who you see on a night-to-night basis with the incredible athleticism, with some of the in-game dunks that you've seen from them. Maybe you put some money on the line, you could get these guys to get out there and do this dunk contest, because if you are a believer that the biggest stars of the game need to be in the dunk contest, what it does is twofold. Number one, creates buzz around the dunk contest in and of itself, but also offers another representation of the NBA in and of itself. The NBA is a global game with millions of people who watch and love the game of basketball. What better representation to see some of the biggest names of the sport participating in what is, Reggie Miller, the marquee event of NBA All-Star Weekend outside of the NBA All-Star Game itself, which is the dunk competition. I'll never forget watching the 2000 dunk contest. And yes, while Vince Carter stole the show and put on arguably the greatest dunk contest performance that we've ever seen, you know who was also balling out that night? Steve Francis and Tracy McGrady. They were putting on a hell of a show themselves, pushing Vince Carter to be able to have the kind of night that he did. That's what the dunk contest needs. Guys willing to push each other to be better and display the kind of creativity that allows you and I to get excited about the dunk contest. But that would be my solution. Let's get $1 million on the line for the winner, $500K for the runner-up, $1 million donation to the charity for the winner, and $500,000 charity donation to the runner-up for their charity of choice as well. And I think you would be able to create the kind of buzz that you're looking for to draw the attention for guys to do it. And let me get on LeBron for a second. Yeah, LeBron, of course, 20th consecutive NBA All-Star start for him. Marvel at it. Love it. Incredible record. When LeBron James, 2010, something like that, 2009, 2010, when it got out there and told Cheryl Miller, hey, I'm preliminarily putting my name in the dunk contest for the next season, and all the buzz started jumping about, LeBron going to do the dunk contest. Hey, you hear LeBron go do the dunk contest, and he never did it. If that guy wasn't willing to do the dunk contest, why should any of these other dudes look around to be able to feel like they need to do it? And that's why, if you're on the train of stars need to do it, that's why it's important. Imagine if LeBron James had done the dunk contest, what the perception of the contest would be, the perception of the NBA All-Star Weekend in and of itself. And here is where I will leave this final point when it comes to the All-Star Weekend in and of itself. If Michael Jeffrey Jordan was willing to get out there and do the dunk contest himself, there is no reason on this planet the names that are representing today's biggest superstars in the league shouldn't do it either. Well, you say, Kevin, it's a different time, a different age. Dudes don't want to embarrass themselves on social media. They don't want to become memes. They don't want to be made for fodder when it comes to their conversation around them flubbing a dunk or missing a dunk, being embarrassed on national television. Who gives a rip? Guys should be willing to put their ego aside to put on a show for the fans. If Dominique Wilkins could do it, if Michael Jordan could do it, come on, man. Y'all can do it too. It's not that big a deal. And here's the thing. Take a chance. You never know what could happen. And guys could be able to put themselves in the annals of NBA history. And look, dunking is hard. It's hard to come up with creative stuff. You say, Kevin, we might have seen all the greatest dunks that there is to be created. I saw this dude named Jordan Killigan or something like that on a video out here doing 540 dunks, 720s, all kinds of ridiculous stuff. There's dunks that we still haven't seen yet that are still waiting to be done. And I would love to see if these guys are capable of doing it. But again, as we look at all the money that's being made by these players, the incentive to do it isn't necessarily there because of the amount of money that's on the line. And if you get hurt in a dunk contest, an NBA owner is going to look at you like, hey, you probably shouldn't have been out there in the first place. So again, I don't know what you do about that, but that would be my idea and solution to the dunk contest. Put some money on the line, damn it, and let's see what happens for guys if they want to get out there and do it. But something has to be done for the NBA All-Star Weekend altogether. It doesn't have the same buzz and the same sizzle that it used to. And maybe it's because the guys that are out there participating in the contest don't really care as much as what you and I would want them to, or how the stars of yesteryear used to do it. I don't know. But at the same time, NBA All-Star Weekend is over with. It's time to move on and get ready for the rest of the regular season in the NBA. The final push through the end of the regular season into the playoffs begins now. Thank goodness the NBA All-Star game is over. At least the game being played in and of itself for this year's version is done. But the conversation surrounding the NBA All-Star Weekend and the game itself, I'm sure, will rage on Adam Silver as he tries to figure out a way to get some of these dudes to give a damn about the game and the weekend in and of itself. Before I get out of here today, Micah Parsons was talking again this past weekend. Micah Parsons, as part of the NBA All-Star Game theme here, won the Celebrity Game MVP. My man dropped 37 points, 16 rebounds, was the star of the NBA Celebrity Game over the weekend. About the only way the Cowboys can find themselves getting notoriety in the month of February, it feels like at this point. But all jokes aside, shout out to Micah Parsons. And part of his weekend, his tour de force, not only playing in the game itself, he went on the Stephen A. Smith show. And Stephen A. Smith, who had went on The Edge, Micah Parsons' podcast, during Super Bowl week, had a chance to sit down with Micah for about a 45-minute interview, and they discussed a variety of things. Micah Parsons taking up for his quarterback and Dak Prescott, saying, look, it's a team game. It's not all on Dak, for the reason why they lost 48-32 in the wild card game against the Green Bay Packers. But at the same time, he did say a couple of interesting things that drew my attention. Number one, he addressed DeMarcus Lawrence's comments, where DeMarcus Lawrence, of course, had went on First Take saying, in summation, that the Cowboys were tired and were burnt out because of the amount of pressure that they face every single year and every single game, because the teams that play them look at them as their Super Bowl, and they were tired by the time they got to the Green Bay game. to which, of course, drew the ire of a bunch of Cowboys fans and folks who cover and watch the Cowboys. Hello. But Micah Parsons responding saying, look, man, it's my job not to be tired by the time we get to that game. And more importantly, that's the kind of culture that doesn't need to be around here anymore, to which I rose my eyebrow and said, hey, now, wait a minute. Are you calling out DeMarcus Lawrence and saying this is not the kind of culture that we want around here? The kind of commentary that Lawrence offered is something that has been a part of the example of why the culture of the Cowboys has been in question year after year. Maybe that is the case. But what obviously drew other attention as well is the kind of players that Micah Parsons wants to have. Getting a downhill linebacker that can help out in the run game and a nasty 330 interior lineman, to which I say, now, that's interesting, because the Cowboys did draft Mozzie Smith, to which Micah Parsons was extremely excited for during draft night last year. Mozzie Smith not necessarily having the kind of impact that you wanted him to have in year one of his rookie year, but at the same time, he's a defensive tackle coming from Michigan, still got a lot to learn about the NFL game and to play a little bit differently versus what he was being asked to do in Michigan. So there's still time for him to grow, and you saw flashes of it from him at times, but ultimately the rookie class of 2023 for the Dallas Cowboys was disappointing. But the overall point that I'm getting to here is that Micah Parsons talks a lot. And in some ways, I appreciate it because he seems to have a general understanding that something has got to change about the way that the Cowboys go about their business when it comes to addressing the culture, the personality, and physicality that comes with being a team that's considered one of the best in the NFL and doing that on a consistent week-to-week basis. And Micah Parsons, I think, wants to try and change some of that. But at the same time, the amount of talking that he does, whether it be on his podcast, on social media, or otherwise, I'm sure is wearing thin on some Cowboys fans. Because here's the thing. When you're winning and you're winning a lot, especially if you're going deep into the playoffs, that kind of talking doesn't bother people. But when you're constantly talking and not being able to back it up with deep postseason runs, especially knowing the amount of talent that the Cowboys have had on their teams each of the last 3 years, they've won over 12 games each of the last 3 years and still have not made it to the NFC title game. Folks aren't trying to hear what you've got to say about how you feel about this team, what you want to see around you on this team, and more importantly, why you're the one that's constantly doing it. Because no matter how you may feel about Micah Parsons or the Cowboys, they will always be the number one conversation of the National Football League, even though they've got Michael Jordan running around in a red uniform wearing number 15 in Kansas City, who's won 3 Super Bowls in the last 5 years. No matter what, the Cowboys will be the biggest conversation, not just in the NFL, but in arguably all the sports. And now you're having Micah Parsons being called out by Bart Scott, saying he's the quote-unquote most sensitive man I've ever seen, and this, that, and the third. To which I say, first of all, Bart Scott could shut the hell up, number one. And I can say that on a number of fronts, on a lot of different things. But more importantly, why would he feel like the need to say that? Micah Parsons is not a guy that shies away from being able to give his thoughts on the current state of the Cowboys, how he feels about things on social media, has never shied away from it. But at the same time, that is part of today's athlete. That is going to be coming, especially with one of the biggest names in the National Football League who plays on the most visible team in the NFL and maybe in all the sports. But how do you find a balance if you're Micah Parsons? Because that, to me, it's what's going to have to happen going forward. How do you balance, yes, wanting to discuss and shape the culture of your franchise while not contributing to it in a way that gives people the idea that the amount of talking that you do is the reason why the culture is the way that it is now? Emmitt Smith, Troy Aikman, Michael Irvin, all the stars of the Cowboys of yesteryear will continue to criticize this team because they feel like today's NFL player, more specifically for the Cowboys, doesn't represent the kind of work and kind of championship caliber organization that they built on their backs to be able to have them in position to reap the benefits of what they do now. And until some of that changes, you will continue to hear that criticism from me and from others, because here's what I don't want to see. Micah Parsons having the kind of heel turn that turns him into a player that tries to be something that he isn't. I don't mind Micah talking. I don't mind Micah the personality, What I want him to do is to remain true to himself and the person that he is, because that's what's made him really good on the football field. But at some point, all of this has to turn into results when it matters most. Because when you watch a Patrick Mahomes, when you watch some of these other teams and the kind of postseason success that they've had, it makes you question, what are they doing differently that's allowed them to have the kind of success that they've had and the Cowboys not being able to have it? And yes, I know all the things that come with running and being a part of the Dallas Cowboys, but at the same time, something has got to be different. And if it means Micah talking a little less in order for that to happen, maybe that's what needs to happen. I don't know. All I know is the Cowboys have a cultural problem that needs to be fixed, and maybe it involves a little less talking and a little more doing when it comes to being on the football field and putting forward the kind of results that will quiet everyone else around them and allow them to talk about what's actually happening on the field versus the words that you have to say off of it. Because all the words that have been said, especially over the last 3 years, have come up to mean absolutely nothing for the Cowboys. That has to change. And Micah Parsons may be the leader that does cause that change. Maybe all the talking that he's doing is going to light a fire under this team to be able to be the kind of difference maker that allows them to make the kind of run to the Super Bowl they believe they deserve to be made and moving forward to doing so. I don't know. But right now, all of his words are kind of hollow at this point. For Cowboys fans, they're kind of sick of it. And I, along with them, kind of tired of it too. It's going to be a long offseason for the Dallas Cowboys, and we haven't even gotten out of the month of February at this point. Oh, boy. Good luck with that, Micah. Good luck with that. That's it for this episode of the Gray Area Podcast. Appreciate you hanging out with me today on the Gray Area. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. You can also download the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast for free. And remember, I'm your Mavericks pre- and post-game host on 97.1 The Freak on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Until Wednesday, I'll talk to you then on another episode of the Gray Area Podcast. I'll talk to you later. Peace.